I know we've often spoken about my writings, about my early years of growing up and so forth. And I thought at this time that we could do this on the video, and I would just give you some of the highlights of my years from growing up till the present. I was born on the Lower East Side, 13 Pitt Street, and I was delivered by a midwife in a little bedroom. And my grandparents lived downstairs. My father's full name was Menachem Mendel, but he was called Mendel, and in English he was called Max. And he was born in Rozvadov, which is Poland, sort of on the Austrian border. My mother, Sarah, was born in Koslowe, which is Galicia, Poland. That's where she was born. She came here as a young girl and went to school here. But my father came here already as a young man in his 20s. He made a detour in Belgium and learned diamond cutting there and then came here. And my grandparents were Esther Rivka, Schiffman was her maiden name, and my grandfather, Spielherrsch, Kupfer. And my father's parents, the mother, Baba Gittel, was in Europe, and his father, Zaida Anschel, came back and forth. Now, I'm the oldest of the 5 firstborn. I was 7 years old when the 5th child was born, and we go down the list. Myself, my sister Honey, my brother Leo, my sister Normie, and my brother Penny, Oliver Shalom, who passed away. And those are the 5 of us. After my father's first business, which he was doing when they married, which was insurance business, that didn't go well. He decided to go into making little Cupid dolls in the house with my mother's help. My mother would put all the hands and feet and head and everything of these little dolls. She would put them all together with pins or elastics or whatever. And as a matter of fact, when I was like 1.5 years or something, I think, I was playing on the floor and I swallowed one of the pins, and it was panic, and they rushed me to the emergency, and they took pictures, and they saw where the pin was, and they said, "There's no problem, just give her a lot of potatoes and the pin will come out." And that was the end of the emergency. That was the highlight of the Cupid dolls. We moved to Bensonhurst on Bath Avenue, which was like a main thoroughfare, and it was just 1 or 2 stories, and there were stores underneath. My father had, Papa, he had the egg route, and we didn't stay there too long. So the next thing he did was we moved to 20th Avenue to a store where he thought he could maybe make a little more by having butter and eggs, you know, and maybe do a little better, so that he didn't want to do the egg route, which meant delivering eggs to everybody. Instead, have people come into the store. But we couldn't afford an apartment and a store, and so we lived in back of the store. And so they just put up a big curtain, and behind the curtain they made 3 standing partitions, and the 7 of us were living there. And we thought it was a lot of fun because we used to put on little shows before this curtain. We considered it as a show place. And so we would put on very silly programs, and we'd make Bob and Zina sit there and watch us while we giggled and did these shows. But we didn't stay there too long either. I guess in 3 years we moved 5 times because we couldn't pay the rent. So we usually moved at night. We just moved out. And we'd say, Ma, why are we moving? We just made friends, and but within the same area. We finally ended up in a permanent place on 18th Avenue, over 2 stores, in a not great neighborhood. It was a 1-floor place, 2 apartments. The owners were a gentle, lovely Jewish elderly couple who owned it and lived there, and we lived next door. And downstairs, 1 store was a printing store, and the other store was a black hair salon. We started out going to PS 200, which was a really modern new school, up to 6th grade. And at that point, we were more or less in the Jewish neighborhood. And so we went to that school. We were not far from the Young Israel. We went to the Young Israel Benzethurst. We were all very involved in it. And but then when we moved to 18th Avenue, we were out of the district. This was an Italian, black, totally different. And we had to go to PS 128 for 7th and 8th grade. And I was the only Jewish girl in my class. They were mainly Italian. Going to PS 163 was quite an experience because it still had teachers, what they used to call spinsters. They were not Jewish, and they was not married. And the ones that I had, the one in particular, were very Christian religious, very. The school was orientated that way. And so when you went to the assembly, before the assembly began, the principal would say, everybody bow your heads and fold your hands for the Lord's Prayer. And everybody would say the Lord's Prayer. And I would turn red because I would look around to see if anyone was looking to see whether I'm saying it or not, which I wasn't. And it was a very hard kind of experience, to go through, but it didn't affect me in any way. Our home was so joyous and filled with music and Yiddishkeit and joy that none of this ever affected me in any way. Christmas, with all that was going on, nothing. The only time it was funny was when my father and I, because he taught me my first Hebrew song when I was a year and a half. He spoke Hebrew perfectly, and subscribed to a Hebrew periodical, and was very, very musical. Played the violin by ear. His brother got the violin lessons, and he played the violin by ear. And when Christmas came, some of the melodies were just very irresistible, especially Silent Night. So one time, I'm like singing it, and my father is harmonizing with me, not words, we're just humming the melody, and my mother is saying, Mendel, was sister, We said, it's such a pretty melody, we're just We couldn't resist. But basically, I was not affected in any way. So at that point, on 18th Avenue, they needed people to make hand-sewn neckties. And so my father would take his valise, take the train to New York, and fill it with all of the material, bring it home, and in a little room, which was a bedroom, it was all pre-cut. My father had a pattern. He would put it in the tie, pin the tie into the shape, give it to my mother. She would hand sew it. Then he would press it, and that's the way. When it was finished, he would bring it into New York and get another supply. And that's the way they worked. Those years were already stable. That was it. That was the work they did together. And it's just that it was hard for my mother, basically, because she also cooked and baked and did everything in between. So she'd be up, Thursday, she'd be making luncheon, noodles and gefilte fish and everything, and apple cake. And she would do it early in the morning. She really didn't get dressed. She would have her nightie, and she would put her apron over her nightie and do everything, And we would all leave for school in the morning. We'd each line up, kiss her goodbye in the morning, and she would go into the room to do her work, when they worked together. And Friday night was very special because we really sang all my father's nigunim, and we were like a choir. It was just very special. Our neighbor would open her door and listen to us because it was just such a joyous thing. After the meal, usually friends came over for tea and cake. And you would just sit there and talk until the candles went out, because we didn't light. You couldn't afford to keep a light on. And then Saturday night, right after Havdalah, my father would take out his violin and he would start playing all the melodies. And again, that was our life. The way in which we were raised, which was outreach, always have a feeling and an understanding for the next one. My mother would always say, bring your friends, let them come. They're welcome to come here for Shabbos, Friday night, whatever. And so we grew up with this feeling of outreach, of not, don't do this and don't do that, but just enjoying. And so it stayed with me, and I think, Dad and I, when we brought up all of you kids, we were determined to do the same thing. We had that same feeling, and Dad had the same feeling about outreach, and that's what we transmitted to all of you, that same feeling of love in a joyous way, in a positive way, and not negative. At 15 and a half, I told my mom and dad, Bob and Zaida, that I was ready. I'm going to be 16, and you could get your working papers at the age of 16. And so I got my working papers, and I transferred New Utrecht High School, where I was going, and transferred to Knight High School. And Zaida and I, Papa, took me down to see my cousins, the Lights. David and Max Light, they were cousins, and they were dress manufacturers. And so they said, okay, they'll hire me as a gopher, and when a buyer comes in, I would try on a sample dress for the buyers, and that would be part of the deal. So I would be the model, and I would be the gopher for the workers or whatever. So I was paid $7 for the week, and they deducted for Social Security. And in the winter, and these are my cousins, in the winter, when I had to go home early on Friday, they deducted for that too. And so I would come home with my pay envelope and just give it to my mom, and she would give me 50 cents plus coffee. And so at that time, I also was singing. While working for the lads, my cousins, I also had a radio program. It was WEVD, which was the Yiddish station. And it was 12 to 12:15, 15 minutes. So every day, I used to run out of my workplace in Manhattan and run, I don't know what, 10 or 12 blocks to the radio studio, do my 15-minute program, which was my lunch time, and then run back to my place again. I sang mostly Yiddish and Hebrew. Those were mostly what I sang. But what really, really made me feel very special was every day in the New York Times, there was a listing of all the programs over the day. And every day I would look at that listing, because there it was at 12:15, and my professional name was Fern Cooper. And there I was listed, Fern Cooper. That made me feel good. I got no pay. I was doing weddings also at that time. I sang with a little choir. And I decided if I'm singing, I should do it properly, so I started voice lessons. As I was singing and so forth, I decided to try out to audition for the Major Bowes Amateur Hour. And I told my teacher, and he said, well, don't be disappointed if you don't make it, you know? And I looked at him like, what is he saying, you know? And I just went for the audition, and they called me and they said, you know, we want you back and we want you on the program, radio show. It was a radio show that was broadcast across the whole country, and it was very, very big. And you called in, you phoned in votes. So I came on. It was very exciting, and I sang Si Bonet in Spanish, and I loved it. I really loved it. And they had an audience there, like a theater. It was a regular audience. And then I found out the next day that I was a winner. And their agent, an agent called and offered to have me in a troupe that was leaving shortly for the West Coast. And it was going to include Frank Sinatra, who was the headliner. And it was all very exciting. I tell my mother, and she said, first of all, you can't go by yourself. And soon it's going to be Rosh Hashanah. What are you going to do? What are you going to do Shabbos? No, you can't go. So I said, okay. I said, I'm sorry, but I can't go. It didn't bother me at all. I was just so excited that I achieved that. That was the exciting part to me, that I made it. You know, the fact that I could do it was what made me feel good. And the rest didn't really matter. It's hard to believe. Well, during that period, I have a cousin who's my age, and we were very close. And if something was happening, she would come and stay over. And a friend of mine was having a little party in her home in Borough Park, and she invited me, and I invited my cousin to come that job, and so we would go to the party together, and we took the subway to Borough Park, and this friend had a brother at YU, so she asked him to bring some of his friends to the party. So he did, and we had a really nice time, and I met this young man, and I thought he was very nice, and I thought he liked me. And as it turned out, my cousin thought he liked her. So we came home. The next morning, my mom said, so how was the party? And you met, nice. So my cousin said, yeah, we met this very nice boy, and I think he likes me. So I didn't say anything. I figured, well, I knew he asked me for my phone number, and he asked her for her phone number. And we both have the same last name, Schachter. So I didn't hear from him again. Sometime later, I got a postcard, and it said he was asking me if I would accompany him to an alumni function that was being held by one of the classmates in Bensonhurst. Being that it was in Bensonhurst, he invited me. Fine. So we went, and at that point, he was already a freshman in college, and he told me that he's pre-med, he's planning to go to medical school, and his parents live in Washington Heights, but he comes from White Plains. And I told my mother, she says, I don't know, she's going to be a doctor. I don't know if we'll hear from him again. And then, I guess, 3 years later, or so, or 2 years later, I was singing at this hotel in the Catskills, Kosher Hotel, and his friend, Rabbi Averick, was then a waiter at Grossinger's, happened to be there that night. And he goes back to his friend Irving, who's a waiter at Grossinger's, and says, hey, guess what? You remember Barley Schachter? Well, she's singing, at this hotel. So why don't you, go and hear her? So the following show, there they are, and there he is. And that was really like the beginning of the summer. And by the end of the summer, his mother had a cottage up there, and he brought me over to her, and that was the start. He had to make a decision about what he was going to be doing. Well, what happened was he had gone for a few interviews for medical school, and the interview that he went to, they asked him where he graduated from, and he said Yeshiva University, and they said, what is that? And there was really no way that with his background that he could get into medical school. And so at that point, with a lot of help from his mother, he decided that he would continue studying and go to rabbinical school. And of course, his mother, Anna Koslowe, was a very unusual woman. She was extremely pious. She was one of two sisters that was given the education in Europe of a son. So she was very gifted, and she corresponded in Hebrew with all the rabbis and professors at YU. She was very special. She ran every morning to daven and stood outside the door where they daven the minyan, and davened every morning. Irving was the youngest of 5, and none of the others were observant. She had tried, But unfortunately, in White Plains, the environment just didn't lend itself. And she was such a gentle, kind person, so modest and unassuming, and so loving of her children, but so concerned that they weren't observant, that she fasted twice a week from the time that they were adults and they were not observant. She started doing that without reprimanding them, still loving them, still being a caring mother, but that's what she did. And so it was her joy when she met me and she knew that he's going with someone that's observant. And then, of course, when he was becoming a rabbi, it was the ultimate joy of her life. It really was. Dad was studying for the rabbinate, and I was working. And we could not get married right away because there was no money. And that's the way it was. So while he was going for smicha, he decided that he wanted to make some extra money. And it was just at that time that the diamond industry had come to New York. It was the salvation of my parents. My father finally had a chance because he had been trained as a diamond cutter in Belgium. And so he opened a little place. And my two brothers had taken apprentices to study diamond cutting, and they were with him. And the whole industry had come here, and there was a big demand for apprentice diamond cutters. And so he went and became an apprentice, and he got a job at a diamond cutting place. And while there, he made a deal with the owner. He came across this big stone that they call a bullocker, which you don't know how it's going to turn out. So he made a deal with him, and he ended up cutting this bullocker into a lovely diamond engagement ring for me. And that's it. That's my diamond engagement ring. We became engaged on December 7th, 1941, which was Pearl Harbor Day. It just happened that they had prearranged for my parents to go to his house, and that was the engagement, his parents and my parents. And then we went through the next 2 years until 1943, August 22nd, 1943, when we were married. And our wedding was quite modest. It was at the Jewish Community Center, Bensonhurst, and it was in the afternoon, and it was a dairy meal, because that's all we could afford. And I think we borrowed the money from my brother Leo, who himself was, maybe 19 years old, and was just working diamonds, but had managed to save a few, $200. He lent it to my mother so she could pay for the wedding. I have no pictures because we couldn't afford a photographer. We only have the wedding pictures of the bride and groom, that's all. Not of my parents or anything else. I borrowed my wedding gown from one friend and my veil from another friend. And my sister did my hair. And I was very happy. I don't know. Just, I guess that's the way I was. So then, from the wedding, we were going to the Commodore Hotel for the night. So we had to go back to my house to get our luggage, because we had forgotten to bring it with us. And so we get to my house, which, was just one floor, and we forgot the key. So we don't have the key to get into the house. So Irving says, Dad says, okay, I'll climb up the ladder and I'll go in through the window. So he climbs up the ladder, and just then a patrol car's driving by, and the policeman gets out and he comes over. What are you doing? Going up the ladder? We had to convince him that we're going on our honeymoon and we have to get our luggage. That's the way that started. So then we went to the Commodore Hotel for like one night. Because then the next day, we had to be in Mamaroneck where he was going for a tryout for his rabbinical job. And I went along with him, and I had to sit there, and I had a big black straw hat, you know, and I sat there because they wanted to see me too, you know. And then he was hired. It had 30 members, a tiny little building across from the railroad station with a little brook running on the side, and 30 families. And we were very happy because it was 6 miles from White Plains, where his parents lived, and his parents were very happy. So that's where we started. Being in Mamaroneck at that time was very exciting because we were just starting out and there were just so few members there. It gave us a chance to really use all our abilities because they said, you know, we want a young rabbi because we want you to start a youth group. We don't have anything. We need a youth group. We want to have, you know, functions and things. And so we said, fine, you know. And so we got to work. There was one classroom for Hebrew school, and the other room was his office. So I became a Sunday school teacher. I formed a little children's choir so that on Friday night they sang. And that way we got the parents to come. Then we put out a little newspaper bulletin which Dad wrote, and I typed it, and then he would run it off, and we did that. And then we formed two youth groups, a boys group and a girls group. So I was the leader of the girls and he was the leader of the boys. And then we had socials, and he had sports things for them, basketball and so forth. So and in the meantime, he took out the phone book and he started looking up Jewish names, and he would call and we would go visit. We would just call and go visit. And gradually, the membership started to grow. And we had this mix of the local people who had stores in the village and these very exclusive sections where very wealthy Jewish families had moved in, and celebrity people. Barney Balaban, the president of Paramount Pictures, and other people, the Wolfsons were there. And he blended them all together. He just managed to just keep them all, you know, part of this little synagogue. I became pregnant, and I continued doing everything. I have a picture of me in really, really big, still conducting the children's choir and teaching. And Neil was born in June, and so it worked out very well. So I was going, my sister-in-law Nettie, Oliver Sholem and Victor, he was a pharmacist, and they had a pharmacy on Lexington and 77th, right near Lenox Hill. And all the Park Avenue doctors came to him, used him. And so Nettie said, well, you have to use Dr. Mortimer Rogers because he is the best, and you have to use him for your obstetrician. He really was very, very fine and took very good care of me. And so I gave birth at Lenox Hill Hospital. Neil was born June 19th, 1945, and then Kenny was born April 26th, 1948, a week before the State of Israel was declared, and that was a very special time. And then Mark was born April 28th, both of them were Passover babies. I was eating matzahs. And he was born also at Lenox Hill with Mortimer Rogers. And then Shari, at that point, we decided, you know, it's enough with running into New York. When I was ready to give birth with Kenny, I was staying by my parents in Borough Park because it was like around Pesach, and that Irving had to be with the synagogue. So he came, and then he went back, and I remained. And then I went into labor. And so my father took me to the hospital, and my father's in the room with me, and the nurse comes in, and she's looking at me, and she's looking at my father, and she doesn't know what to say. So I suddenly realized she probably thinks it's my husband. So I said, no, my husband is coming very shortly. This is my father. This is what it's like when you're married to a rabbi, you know. Anyway, so Shari, we switched, and I took a doctor in Mamaroneck, the finest, most wonderful doctor. And I went into labor, and nothing happened. And I waited and waited and waited, and nothing happened. And I'm in the hospital, I'm in the delivery room, and the doctor says, something is wrong. I don't know what it is. She's going up and down, but she's not coming out. I think we're going to have to do a C-section. And so we called in another doctor to confirm it, said yes. And so they did a C-section. And so he always said to me, you know, I always felt that such pressure, because here you had 3 normal births, and now you switch to me and you have a C-section. So that's okay, but I had a girl. That was the best part. So, so Shari was born November 21st, 1955. We had a very insulated existence. Friday night and Shabbos, it was just us. And Saturday afternoon, they would play board games, they would read, and just the 4 of them. There were no friends for them in Mamaroneck. There were no religious kids there. As Neil was getting a little bigger, ready for school and so forth, our friend, a rabbi friend in New Rochelle, Rabbi Golovensky, who also had children the same age, also was very concerned because there was no yeshiva. And so he said, you know, we have to get together, we have to start a yeshiva here for all our children. And so we said we would support him and help in every way. And so we were the starting nuclear group. And when this property came up for auction in Orienta, by that time, each of us from each of our communities had gotten supporters. And we bought the property. And so Neil started school there, and all our kids went to Ashisher Day. So in the summers, they went to camp. We sent them to Woonsocket, to Camp Spruce Hill, Woonsocket, and Raleigh. I remember when all of you went to Camp Spruce Hill, I'm pretty sure it was Spruce Hill, our first little camp. And it was, camp visiting was always a highlight. And this particular time was a real highlight because there was a program. And the program included a performance by the orchestra. And Mark, it was really such a joy to watch you there playing away, concentrating so much on your playing. And you know, another memory that Shari always brings up to me is you know, when all the boys went to camp, and I was so young, and so you sent me, and you left me there. And even though I knew that you were with the camp director's family, you didn't see it that way, and you always said, how could you do that? How could you send me to camp and leave me there all as such a little girl? And you know, another memory that's been a family kind of tradition, I started birthday parties. And so each of them had a birthday party every year. Each one really, really had a birthday party with the cake and the candles and the friends and everything. That became a ritual. And we have movies to prove it. And then when they reached the first bar mitzvah was Neil's, and it was a Friday night Shabbos bar mitzvah. The cousins and the aunts and you know, our immediate little family, they were put up by our people around near us, near the shul, and we had a Friday night meal in a room in the shul, and then we had a Shabbos in shul bar mitzvah, and then we had a luncheon. We had a kiddush for the synagogue, but then we had a luncheon just for our family. And this is the way it was for each of them. It all went the same way. Shari did not have a bat mitzvah because she did not want one. She was too shy. But she had a sweet 16, and it was a real bang-up sweet 16. We rented a bus, and we brought all her friends, her camp friends, from Flatbush by bus to the Westchester Jewish Center for her sweet 16 party. So she had her party at the shul. My own life during that time, I was teaching Sunday school. I actually taught kindergarten for 40 years. I was very involved in sisterhood and did all their programs for them. I was program chairman and publicity chairman. And I led a youth group. And what was special was these teenagers who came from not observant homes, and I got them involved and connected with NCSY, and they went to Israel with a leader from YU, and some of them really became totally observant. I organized a college youth group so that when they came home from school in the summer, they would have something. And I organized programs for them so that they could socialize and meet with each other. It was all Westchester. They didn't have to be observant or anything, but to be in this group, it had to be kosher, and it had to observe all the observant rules. And it was very, very successful. In one of the programs that I had just happened at that time, I knew Kalbach, Shlomo Kalbach. I knew his sister. His sister happened to be a friend of mine, unconnected with him. He happened to be in White Plains, and I called him. And I said, you know, it would mean so much if he would come and give a program for these young people. They've never seen a chazan or heard any of this music. And he was very gracious. And he came in, and he was in this auditorium, and our big auditorium, and all these young college kids. And he dimmed the lights, and he had everyone sit on the floor, and he lit candles. And it was the most unbelievable experience. And when he was all finished, they all got up and danced. And they'd never done that. And it was such a tremendous thing. All of these things we were bringing to the community. It was part of what we wanted to do. And we have countless, and you guys all know who they are, countless young people who are now totally observant. One of them is a Rosh Yeshiva, the Mir Yeshiva in Israel, comes from no background, no observant background. And all of these were young people that were encouraged. If they were at all interested, they would call and they'd say, can I come over and talk? And they would come over. And on Friday nights, if there was a bar mitzvah, they would be invited to come to us Friday night, so they would see what it's like to wash and bench and have what a meal is like. Rabbi Golovinsky was a member of the Chaplaincy Board of New York, and at that particular time, the chaplain, Jewish chaplain of Sing Sing, had a sudden heart attack and passed away, and there was an opening for a new chaplain. And he spoke to Dad, and he said, you know, you have young children, and it's a side job, but it will pay you an income, and it'll pay for tuition or whatever. If you want it, I think you could have it. So Dad said, you know, he would consider it. He'd check, you know, with the congregation. It was small then, and he wasn't getting paid very much. So it went before the Board of Rabbis, I guess, and it was approved by the chaplaincy board. And I think Governor Dewey was the governor then and signed it. And in 1950, he became the chaplain at Sing Sing. And being there with the prisoners there also included a special wing, the death house at that time. And in the death house at that time were the Rosenbergs, Ethel and Julius. And so they became part of his congregation there, and he would see them every week for the next 2 years. He saw them. And sadly enough, when they were executed, the execution was on June 19th, on Neil's birthday. And they had 2 little boys, just like he had 2 little boys. It was an emotional experience, doubly so because of the connection with them and with Dad and his own family. In the present time now, I had occasion to do 2 videos. One was by the granddaughter of Ethel Rosenberg, who made this documentary, and she asked me to be in it, and I was. And I was able to say what Dad had told me, so that I knew his feelings about Ethel and about how he felt about her, and describe the execution and what she said to him at that time. And I said all this on that video. And the most recent video was his Shabbos, his assistant at the Sing Sing, Doc Friedgood, who was there and had served time, 25 to life, and he had served over 30 years. He was, at this point, 89 years old, and it was his last time to ask to be freed. And so all of you guys, and you, Neil, helped me to put that letter together. And we sent this letter to the probation board, and we said, we know what our dad would have wanted. It didn't come on time, and they turned it down. And we didn't realize it, and we wondered why. And then it did come, and then there was a special meeting called, and he was freed, and he came down to West Palm, and we finally contacted him, and we all went to Boca, to Tanya's house, and he came there, and we did a video. We have that video. So he wrote me a very special letter, and he thanked me for saving his life. So thank God, I'm happy that I was able to do that, because that's what Dad would have done. I think that in looking back, you could see that Dad was a role model for all of us, and for the children and the grandchildren and the great-grands. He was not just the rabbi of Westchester Jewish Center. He was the chaplain at Sing Sing. He was the head of the Criminal Justice Department at Mercy College, where he was interviewed by 2 nuns and given this position. He went to Russia in '56 and brought back the Minsk Torah from Minsk. We were in Israel many times, and each time it was for something major that was happening in Israel that he would be helping with. He also was very civic-minded, very involved in the local community. He took part. He was the local chaplain of the fire department and the police department, and he didn't mind. He mingled easily with non-Jews. He didn't have a problem. They respected him and looked up to him. They loved him. When the civil rights movement was in the process of happening, he said to you, Neil, he said, you know, I want you to come with me because this is something that you'll always remember later on. It's very, very important and very special. I want you to be there. The war broke out in Israel in '67. Neil was in law school. You were in law school. And you ran to get your visa to go to Israel because you wanted to fight. But they weren't giving out visas. They were allowing it. So the week after the war ended, you were in Israel. And Kenny was with Zamir. And he was in Israel with Zamir. And you both met in the amphitheater where they gave this magnificent concert with bombs still going off. You could hear the sounds, and you recorded the music that Zamir sang that week after the war ended. That was such a special time, such a special time. And so you could see how all of this was absorbed into the being of all of the next generation. As I think back to all our family celebrations, Hanukkah stands out in my mind. The doors and windows would be covered with my homemade decorations. Presents would be piled on the living room floor in the large menorah on a small table facing the window, and all the grandchildren would be standing around chanting the blessings together, then sitting on the carpet floor opening their gifts, and then going into the dining room for potato latkes and applesauce. It was a great time. I am just looking back to the beginning, the start that we had with our 4 children, and looking around now and seeing the culmination of all of the work and all of the joy and all of the everything that I now have. I look at Neil and Pat, I look at both of you with all your children and my beautiful great-grandchildren and grandchildren, and then Kenny and Lori, who chose to make Aliyah in 1979 or 1980, and have raised a beautiful family, and Mark and Rama, who have equally raised another beautiful family, and we have a simcha in August of another wedding. And of course, to Shari and Ricky, who have made a beautiful life together, and who enjoy all of their children and all of the grandchildren, the great-grandchildren to me. And I have to explain that half of my great-grands and grands call me Grandma, and the other half calls me Mima, the younger half. And Ricky's whole branch calls me Mima, and that makes me very, very happy. And we have all grown together so beautifully as one great big family. It's just a joy, and it's certainly something for others to emulate. We have the special joy of continuing a tradition that Daddy started after Shari and Ricky were married and going to the hotel for Pesach, and it worked so well that it is continued each year. And so, please God, if all is well for the coming Pesach, we all plan to be together, all of us, for Pesach. And we hope and pray that it just continues to grow. We now have, I have 16 grandchildren, 26 great-grandchildren, and counting. So I look forward to the many more happy things that hopefully will come along and hopefully that I can share. At all our simchas, it's usually Dad who speaks, and the whole family always look forward. He would be like the MC. He was the master of ceremonies. He was the one that always was in charge. And it was fine with me. I liked it that way. And I never thought about it, until my first bar mitzvah came along, and that was Jamin. And all of a sudden, it's the bar mitzvah, and then we have our own little luncheon, and then they say, okay, now you're the grandma, and we would like you to say a few words, at this simcha. And I just really could not get it together. I just found that I didn't have that ability to kind of just, at least I felt that I couldn't really do it right, So I wasn't happy with that. So after that, I thought about it, and I knew that all these simchas are going to be coming up, And so when the next one was coming, I said to myself, let me see, maybe instead of giving a talk, maybe I could put it into sort of a poem format, sort of a story poem of their life's history up to that point. Once I did it, I started to do it. And so, Kanahara, I did it really from that point on for every one of the grandchildren, except the ones in Israel, where I wasn't. And I figured, okay, then life goes on, and I'm here in Miami, and it's a year that Benji is going to be bar mitzvah, and one day I get a call from Jamin, and he says, Grandma, do you think you could do a poem for Benji? And I said, Jamin, it's been a long while. I don't know if I'm really up to it. I got to get my things working and get it together. I'll try. And about a month or so before his bar mitzvah, I got very, very ill. I was rushed to the hospital. So bad. Remember, Kenny, you came in from Israel because it was very bad. And I had surgery and, and they were saying, don't worry, Grandma, Benji wants you there, but don't worry, we understand. And I said, you know what? I'm going to be there. And you know what? 2 weeks after I got out, I flew to New York in the winter, in February. And I read my poem. I read my poem. And so the following year, it was Meira's bat mitzvah, and I wrote a poem for her too. So I'm very privileged that I'm still functioning and I'm able to do it for my great-grandchildren, which I never, ever thought, ever. I figured, oh, grandchildren, well, okay, but great-grandchildren? So, thank God. I have found that myself, counting my blessings for the schus that Hashem has given me, and a Dad al Shalom through the years, but for me to be here now to see the fruits of all that we accomplished up to this point, to all of you children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, to see that you've followed in the same path, that you have the same kind of kindness and feeling for others, an understanding that everybody is good and kind and not judgmental, and that the Yiddishkeit and the happiness and the continued support of yeshivas for the children, for their education, for synagogues, for rabbis. Each of you belongs to a shul and is supportive of the rabbi of the shul. It's something you learned, and you know the importance of it. We're very fortunate that we are part of a bigger family of cousins and aunts and uncles who are all the same way. A very unusual family. We now number Kanahara, a couple of hundred of us at our family reunion, and all of us are observant, and children go to yeshivas, and all connect. And so I'm very proud and very thankful and very grateful, and I look forward to many more simchas, please, for Hashem to give me the health and the strength, and we should just be together and just continue in the way that you're going. It's the greatest. And of course, you know that I love you all very much, and I really do.